This week, the Seder is going to be Parshas Vayeishev, and I'd like to dedicate the learning today to the Refuah Shalema, the speedy recovery of my mother-in-law. And her Hebrew name is Bruria Bas Chana. I must be the only person who loves their mother-in-law. I don't know about you, but I'm just, when my girls got married, the boys were like, "Oh, you're my mother-in-law." I'm like, that doesn't mean, that's not a bad thing. That's a really nice thing. Most incredible lady. In this week's Sedra, we have the story of that Andrew Lloyd Webber made famous in the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Now, his story, the Broadway show is quite, relatively accurate, but certainly gives us all a good flavour of what the story was. So we've got the 17-year-old Joseph who is living with his brothers, and he is the favourite son, and he says to his father and his brothers, I had the dream that, there's sheaves of corn and they're all bowing down to me, and the brothers were not happy, and they were saying, what is it? What are you trying to tell us? You think one day you're going to reign over us? And then he has another dream, and he says, I dreamt that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now, they were not happy. Now, it seems to be that the brothers were sort of, not a unit, but they sort of went out and they were going to pasture the flock. And Joseph was sort of like kept at home. And then one day his dad said, go and find your brothers. And so we're picking up the story. It's chapter 37 in Bereshis Lamed Zion. And he goes to the place where he's looking for his brothers, and he finds his brothers in a place called Doson. If anybody wants the handout, does everyone have it? Yeah, anybody don't have it? Okay. And this is the story. Now, I've got the Hebrew on the sheet, but we're not going to be able to read it all. So I'll just, when it comes to it, read the relevant part of the story. I don't know if somebody else wants to read the story on page 1. Anybody want to read? It will be me then. I'm very dramatic. So, verse 18. They saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. And they said each man to his brother, Here comes the dreamer. Come, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say a savage beast devoured him. Then we're going to see what happens with his dreams. Reuven, the oldest brother, I'm up to 21, heard it, and he saved him from their hands. And he said, Let us not take his life. Let us not kill him. He said, Do not spill his blood. Cast him into that pit out in the wilderness, but do not cast your hand against him, intending to save him from their hands and return him to his father. So obviously the Hebrew has got more interesting connotations, but basically for what I want to focus on today, it's a good enough storyline. Reuven said, Don't do that. Put him in a pit, and Reuven then goes back to his father, and the brothers go down to eat, we'll see. And Reuven thinks to himself, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to save him, and he'll be okay. Didn't quite turn out like that. When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the coat of many colours. It was red and yellow, and right? And that's called the Chosones Pasim. Whether it was a coat of many colours we're not going to discuss today. And they took off this coat of many colours, the Chosones Pasim is what it's called in Hebrew, that he had on him. They took him and they cast him into the pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. I'm going to come back to that phrase shortly, because an overarching theme in any lesson that I teach is the rabbis and we are asked to look very closely at the text. And if there's anything missed out that we need to know, or if there's anything that is duplicated, or if anything is what you might consider to be insignificant information, then we have to analyze and think to ourselves what is going on. So if we look at that verse, the pit was empty, there was no water in it. There's like a very classic question. Mm-hmm. Anyone want to?
If it's empty, of course there's water.
Well done. So that's it. So that's what we're going to see, what Rashi says on that. Okay? So if it's empty, if it's empty, what do you mean there's no water in it? If I say this is empty, there's nothing in it. So why are you telling me there's no water in it? Oh. So nothing in the Torah is written by accident. I don't pretend that we're going to know every single answer to every single difficulty that we come across. But for every difficulty we come across, we can glean some information. And if we don't know now, as long as we know what the question is, then we have to realize that every word, every sentence, every letter, every vowel has got importance. So we'll go back to that quite shortly. They sat down to eat bread. This is the brothers who, 10 brothers are sitting down and having snacks or having lunch. They've chucked their own brother, in a pit nearby. Preferably, they moved themselves a little bit of a distance away. We see that the rabbis are telling us, they were like, he's screaming, going, help, get me out. And they're just sort of like, well, let's not sit near there, because it's like a child that's crying and thinking, you're having your tantrum, I'll go, that way. They sat down, they lifted up their eyes, and they saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites were coming from Gilad, their camels bearing gum, balm, ladunum, I'm going to read that, and to be taken to Egypt. Okay, we're going to focus. I'm sorry? Yes. We're relatives, yes. But there are lots of tribes. Let's say any place. Let's say, for example, Mitzrayim is the name of a person. When we look in the book of Vayeishev, Mitzrayim is the name of a person. Canaan is the name of a person. All the name Midian. They're all names of people who became into nations. For example, Moabites is the son of Lot. But there was obviously one person, and that person, they're all there. Okay, I'm not going to focus on the fact they're Yishmaelim. Okay, the next thing we're going to focus on is, in what way is it significant to the storyline that we need to know what the camels were carrying? Do you care? And if you do care, why do you care? Why does the Torah tell us what the camels were carrying? How is that adding to the story? Judah said, I'm up to 26. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? So I don't know whether that means what financial gain have we got here, or why would we do it? He then comes up with a suggestion. Let's come and sell him to the Ishmaelites. Don't let our hands be on him. Let's not get our hands dirty, for he is our brother, our own flesh. Let's not do anything to him directly. And his brothers listened. Next verse. Midianite traders passed by. They lifted Joseph out the pit. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. They brought Joseph down to Egypt. Now, what I'm going to focus on after I've discussed the first two things is, look at that verse, and I'll read it in Hebrew, the bottom one. Vayavru anashim Midyanim, and Midianite men passed by, Socharim, merchants. Vayim shechu, and they pulled him. Vaya'alu, and they lifted him, Yosef, they lifted Yosef out of the pit. Vayim karu es Yosef, and they sold Yosef, La Yishmaelim, to the Ishmaelites. Be'esrim kosef, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Vayoviu es Yosef Mitzrayim, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. Now, what we're going to focus on mainly today is who. That's it. Who sold Joseph? It doesn't say who sold Joseph. And the rabbis find this so interesting, because the whole of verse 28 tells us the Midianites passed by, they, ambiguous, pulled, they lifted, they sold Joseph, they brought Joseph down to Egypt. Now, so for me, everything's about what is added information that we don't need to know. The pit's empty, it's got no water in it. And why do we care about it?
Yeah.
And then why, when it comes to they sold Joseph, why don't you tell me who sold Joseph? Why do we not know? And what are the possibilities of who sold Joseph? So now you have to turn the page.
Is it a bit like, when a person is put in front of a firing squad and nobody knows who's got the bullets? So it's a collective.
Yeah, that is very interesting what you're saying, and I really understand what you're saying is, but maybe I don't want to say it doesn't matter who sold Joseph, or maybe the Torah on purpose leaves it ambiguous to give us lots of possible options as to who it was that sold Joseph, or who it was that pulled him out the pit. But what I want to suggest is, what can we learn from it? Because every nuance in the text is not for the sake of, well, does it matter who sold him? And if it does, what can we learn from it? And why is it ambiguous? Because here we hear how we bought the Torah in inverted commas. I don't want to say wasting words. We've got a whole section telling us what the camels are carrying, but we don't know who sold Joseph. So that's what I'd like to look at today. So the story carries on. The last part of the chapter says, Reuven returns to the pit, and he sees that Joseph is not there, and he's like, oh my goodness me, what's happened to Joseph? He tears his clothes. He comes to his brothers and he says, Joseph's gone, what am I going to do? And they didn't know what to do. They had Joseph's coat. They killed a goat, dipped the coat in the blood, and they went to Jacob saying, something's happened to Joseph, we're so sorry, and we've got absolutely no idea. Did Reuven or the brothers know what happened to Joseph? It doesn't say the brothers say, we sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. It's very ambiguous. And then the chapter ends with the words, the Midianites sold him to Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward. If you want to look it up later, it's the last verse of that chapter. I'm not on the sheet. I apologize that it's not on the sheet. The storyline gets interrupted by the whole episode of Yehuda and Tamar, and then we go back to the storyline of Joseph arriving in Egypt, and then in chapter 39. So the first thing I'd like to look at is, why does the Torah say the pit was empty, there was no water in it? Because it's like an ambiguous phrase. In Hebrew, vahaborek, the pit is empty, ein bo mayim. Hello, it's empty. You say, your wallet's empty, there was no cash in it. If your wallet's empty, there's nothing in it. I don't need to say there's no cash, there's no credit cards. Nothing is in the wallet. Okay? So,
if it's empty, is there no 24 in it?
Well, that's what is the question. Because it says it's empty. It says the pit is empty in Hebrew.
So do you think it's referring back to when Yaakov was digging wells?
I'm not sure. I don't know what every single rabbi said. It's very interesting because the word bor has got in connotations as well. I'd like to focus on something and what can we learn from what is. So Danielle is picked up on the fact, hold on a minute, we're in the middle of nowhere, you've got a pit, there's no water in it, like hold on a minute, is there anything else in it? And let's see what Rashi says. So that's source B. Source B is the Pasuk, and source C is Rashi, which Danielle has already second-guessed Rashi, and he's telling us what the Medrash says. Mashma shenema v'haborek. Since it states the pit's empty, eini yodea she'ein bo mayim. Am I stupid? I already know there's no water in it. If it's empty, it's empty. Ma Talmud loma ein bo mayim. What on earth do the three words "there's no water in it" teach us? Mayim ein bo. There's no water in it. Aval nachashim va'akravim yesh bo. There are snakes and scorpions in this pit. Now, that can lead to a whole divergence of lots of different things, but I'd like to speak about different things, like why would they chuck him into a pit if they had snakes and scorpions, and he was saved from the snakes and scorpions, all miraculous things and that. The rabbis actually connect this to Chanuka. Usually, Shabbos Chanuka is Parshas Miketz, but it can be Parshas Vayeishev. So obviously, because it's going to be Chanuka this week, I want to connect it to Chanuka. And if you look at source D, Rashi quotes the Gemara in Shabbos, and he says, a Chanuka lamp placed 20 cubits, which is approximately 30 foot. If you have a Chanuka candle, if your menorah is so big, it's invalid. You cannot have a menorah that's too big. Okay? This is what the Gemara says, and Rashi quotes the Gemara. Just as a sukkah whose roofing is more than 20 cubits high is not valid, just as an alleyway whose beam, this is to do with an eruv, if it's too high, it's invalid. So I don't want to go into it because I don't have halachic training and I don't know exactly enough about it. But what I want to know is why are the rabbis, why does Rashi quote this story, and this story about the height of a menorah? It's no coincidence because it's in Parshas Vayeishev. why is the Talmud connecting the height of a menorah, the height of a sukkah, the height of an eruv to this story of the pit? And so that's what I'd like to suggest, what we can learn from it. So the rabbis tell us that people don't usually raise their heads and see objects at a height which is above 20 cubits. As there is a requirement to see the lights of a menorah, and there are people who've got problems, like if you live in a flat, how do you get away with it? I can't give halachic guidance about that. But certainly a sukkah can't be too high, and a menorah can't be too high, and an eruv can't be too high. It has to be at a level where people see it. So the rabbis, if you follow with me, I'm up to source D. If you see where it says Rav Kahana said, that Rav Natan says, right? What is the meaning of the verse written with regard to Joseph? And they took him and they put him in a pit, which is our verse today. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. By inference from that which is stated, the pit was empty, Rashi quotes the Talmud, I know there's no water in it. What are you telling me? There are snakes and scorpions. This is what Rashi brings and tells us. So we learn a halachic, we learn legal code from the fact the pit was empty, there's no water in it. Where are we going with this? I'm hoping you're all confused.
Yes.
Good. What is the connection between not being able to see a menorah so high up and Joseph being thrown in the pit? I've got a feeling Sarah's got something to say.
I was going to say, is it because the pit was so deep that they actually couldn't see what was in it and know what was in it? In the same way as the others were too high.
Correct.
They can't see.
Correct. If something is so tall, so far away, so high, or so low, you can't see.
How could they get him out of it?
I'm sorry?
They would have to have a ladder to get him out of it. It was so
But maybe a rope. I don't know. The thing is, a person, I don't know if anybody's done this, but I imagine if you look down some sort of pit or a well, you can't see the bottom. So you just see what looks like a black, and you just don't see anything. You just don't know what it is. The question is, what are the rabbis trying to connect Chanuka, and it's usually Parshas Vayeishev, to this I can't see? Now, Chanuka celebrates the miracle of the small army over a large army, the miracle of the oil. And sometimes, I read this idea, I wish I could remember where I got it from, because I don't like saying things that where I can't get it from, but I just don't remember where I read it, is that if you put a menorah and it's too high and nobody can see, and one of the laws is people have to see, so if you light, you have to light it at night, and it should be when people are still walking about in the street. You shouldn't wait till 3 o'clock in the morning. The whole point of the message of Chanuka is the miracle of Chanuka and the fact that God saved us and saved the Jewish nation in whatever way. If you don't show the miracle, you're not, it's almost like the pit where it might be there, but you're not showing it, you can't see it. Are we in our lives taking on board, I'm not going to talk too much about Chanuka, are we taking on board the Chanuka message that God was there and saved us and saved the Jewish people? Because when Reuven looked at the pit and the pit appeared to be empty, he only had a superficial look. I don't know if any of you have got children and you say to them, please clear up your room. And they're, I've done it! And then you go like this with your finger and it's like, really? You know, you can see what they've done, they're very small amount, okay? So the messages from Chanuka, the publicity of the miracle and the fact that God was there even after the Second Temple, at that time, God was there and he's in our lives. And I think the idea is that we shouldn't take a superficial glance and we should try where we can in our lives to find God. I think it's quite a hard thing to say, but I think that we have to look to find him. So just the same way that he was there and he made the Chanuka lights last for 8 days, or they found that jar of oil, we have to look for miraculous things in our own lives and not take what I call a superficial glance, the same way Reuven looked at the pit and didn't see that there were scorpions. He just said the pit's empty. There was something more. And there are times in our lives where, I don't want to say miracles happen. I mean, even if you wake up in the morning, a lot of miracles are hidden in nature, whereby even a grass growing or, a child being born, countless times. There are so many nuances where things can unfortunately go wrong. A human being is so frail. For me, I have to try and train myself to see the hand of God and to see the miraculous even in the nature. Because if you just look at the pit and the pit's empty, you're not really looking. And so for Chanuka, the menorah is representing the miraculous. We have to look, we have to see. And if we keep it's so high, it's sort of out of our glance, it's out of our reach, we're not looking. And I think that's just an idea. I wish I could remember who said it. But it's also very hard because things don't always go well, and we're going to address that in a minute with my next highlighted part of the text, which is source E on your sheet.
I was just wondering, do we know how deep the pit was?
So we don't know how. I'm sure that Mefarshim say different things, but they say it was more than 30 foot. But we don't know exactly what the pit was. We don't have the details. I think whenever there's a detail, the rabbis are so carefully nuanced, looking at the words in the text. And the idea that why would the Torah use 3 words, it had no water in it? The rabbis have got a tradition that it had snakes and scorpions. But linking it in the very same text to Chanuka, because Chanuka is part of the story. And I think that it is, look for the miraculous. Take a second look. I don't want to say like clear up your bedroom properly, but there are things, if I didn't want to eat olives, if I was very allergic to something, I would be very careful what I looked at. You would look very carefully. And if I want to see God in my life and I'm looking and I'm looking, I'll see more things. Madeline.
I'm worried about giving away the
Punchline.
punchline.
Okay. You're welcome. I don't mind.
The brothers, it's telling you, the brothers didn't actually sell because of the confusion with the Ishmaelites. Or was it the Ishmaelites? Was the Midianites?
We're going to look at that.
Was the Midianites selling it back to the Ishmaelites?
Maybe they have
At the end of the day, who sold Joseph?
Okay, well, it's part of the plan, of course. Okay, let me look at one more thing, and then we're going to talk about who sold Joseph, okay? So, this is now looking at the camels, what they were carrying. V'hagamalehem nosim nochos v'tzri valot. Why have we got a whole string sentence of what the camels are carrying? Deborah.
I'm thinking it's to show what type of people these people are.
Yeah, what does it teach us? They
They were wealthy by carrying. I don't know how much this was worth in that time. They were traders. They were wealthy.
Yeah, but
they
they're
had enough
selling.
money to.
No, but they could be selling it. Yeah,
So
maybe.
the fact that that the Torah specifies what they had shows the type of people they were. I think.
What do you think that they mainly sold in antiquity?
Spices.
Yes, they did sell spices, yeah. What else do you think they sold? The truth is, what's the biggest thing that we still sell today? What's the most sought after resources?
Petrol.
That's right. Okay, so that's what they sold. They sold oil. Look what Rashi says. He quotes the Medrash. Source F, at the bottom of page 2. Loma pirseim hakosov mas'om. Why does the Torah tell us what they were carrying? Well, do we care? Does it make a difference? Joseph has been chucked in a pit. Who cares who sold him? The Ishmaelites, the Midianites, his brothers. He's basically, if anybody's seen that film, don't ever watch it, 12 Years a Slave. We don't know what slavery is. Today, modern slavery is still slavery, but a slave, let's say a black person in America, 200 years ago, they have no rights. You can't go in shops, you can't write, you can't read. If you've seen that film, oh my goodness me, that gives you an idea of what slavery is. The people had no rights. Joseph was not a free person. He was there. what do we care what is sitting in the caravan with the camels, or he's locked up in the cargo? What does he care what's there? What does the Rashi tell us? Lahodia matan schoron shel sadikim, to tell us the reward of the righteous. Joseph is called the righteous. Joseph is the tzaddik. She'ein darakom shel aravim laseis ela naft. Usually, Arabs would carry naft, anything like coal, petrol, smelly stuff, disgusting, right? But for this one, he was carrying spices. Shelo yizkok, I'm up to the bottom of page, mereach ra'ah. Okay, Joseph shouldn't be disturbed by a smelly petrol smell. Rather, he should have a lavender scent bag or Chanel perfume. Really? That's going to help him? He's been sold by his brothers. They hate him. He's basically 17 years old. He's all alone. No one can help him. No one comes looking for him. He's been sold from pillar to post. Does he care? Does he care? That's what Rashi says.
It's not the fact that he cares. It's the fact that the journey was made easier.
Journey was made easier. Okay, so let's put it in more modern days. Yeah, okay. So someone is going to Auschwitz in a cattle cart, God forbid, to even think of that imagery. Do you think the smell's going to be the worst part of the journey?
But there is a difference between being stuffed in a cattle cart with God knows how many people than being in a first-class carriage with all the comforts. The journey itself is more pleasant. Not that you would necessarily know what's awaiting you when you arrive.
But that makes
But also Joseph believed his own prophecy that he was meant for better things.
I understand that, but when he's stuck in this cattle cart, even if it's got smelling spices, right? Not so nice.
So that means it was all premeditated.
What do you mean it was premeditated?
Well, why did the camels come with gum?
No, that's be whatever they happened to be coming, because they were walking past. It wasn't. It was they were driving past. It was like the camels were coming past.
Is there a way of saying that Hashem was with him even throughout the dark light? He was trying to at least make it easier for him. Well, yes, it was going to happen, but...
So exactly what Sarah said. Sarah said, even when a person is going, it's a bit like what I said before about Chanuka, even when a person is going through a very difficult time, occasionally you could have like a little flag from, like a sign from God saying, I know you're going through this difficult time, but I'm right, I'm there. It's like a positive sign. Like, God forbid, someone could be in hospital, but then you could also not get stuck at any traffic lights or get an easy parking space. Just that tiny bit, that's sort of God saying, I know you're going through this situation, but I'm going to make this little tiny thing easier. And somebody told me the story once of a child in hospital, and they're about to have an operation, and nothing's going to help them. They know they're having an operation, and they're crying, and they know they've got pain or whatever it is, but they're being pushed in the gurney, and then they see their mum behind the glass, and they just sort of wave, and they just feel a little bit, I just saw my mum, she's there, she's with me. And I think the rabbis are saying, like, even in the darkest moment, and we were in a dark moment at the time of Chanuka, there were glimmers. They found the oil, they managed to rededicate, and the miracle of the oil. So those are two ideas that are just side sharing. Now we come to the main attraction, the main event, who sold Joseph. So we go back to the last verse on the first page, but you don't need to, it's on source G, which just goes page 3. I'll put it there again for you. So the Midianite traders passed by. They pulled, ambiguous, they lifted Joseph out of the pit. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. They brought Joseph to Egypt. Jane, did you want to say something?
Well, I'm just thinking something else about ambiguity. I went to this talk on Shabbos about Jacob struggling with the angel, and one doesn't know, there was a bit in it, but one doesn't know who was asking who for a blessing, and it got very confusing there, so I just sort of
There's lots of times,
little bits
but
about
there are very many ways to understand the Torah, because we say there's 70 ways, so the book is finite itself. But then you wonder, how is it possible that there can be the Gemara and the Mishnah and all the rabbis and the commentaries? Because when something's ambiguous, we have to look, we have to notice, either if it's too much information, too little information. The question is, what can we learn? What's included in the story? We don't know what colour dress Rivka wore when she got married. Can't learn anything from it. Perhaps if something is mentioned, we could learn something from it. And maybe we can notice it, but we don't know what we can learn from it. But maybe one day we will learn something from it. Okay, running out of time. Spent too long on the other bits, so we have to go quickly here. So the first person who I like to look at is Rashi. And he says, this is source H, second one on page 3. Zohi shayara acheres. This is another caravan. Lehodi'acha hakosov shenimka pa'omim harbe. To teach you that Joseph was sold many times. And he carries on to say, in his next comment, he says, Bnei Yaakov took Yosef out of the pit. This is source I. Vayim karuhu la Yishmaelim. He's saying the simple meaning of the text is Joseph's brothers sold him to Egypt, to the Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites sold him to the Midyanim, and the Midyanim sold him to the Egyptians. Because going back to the original verse, we have Judah saying to his brothers, what should we do? Why should we kill our brother? 26, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. The next thing, it says the Midianite traders passed by, they pulled and they lifted Joseph out. So Rashi is very matter of fact, it's obviously Joseph's brothers. And Joseph himself says, if you look at source K on your sheet, which is right the last source I bring you, Vayomer, when Yosef does the big reveal, I am Joseph, is my father still alive? Joseph, okay? And Vayomer Yosef el Achov, and Joseph says to his brothers, Geshuna Eli, come near me, Vayigoshu, and they drew near him. Vayomer, and he said, Ani Yosef Achichem, I am Joseph your brother. Asher Mekartem Osi Mitzrayma. You sold me to Egypt. So that's Rashi's proof. And he says, Yosef himself says, you sold me to Egypt. That's what Rashi says. Not everybody agrees with Rashi, unsurprisingly.
Sorry, can I just ask
Yes.
something? If so many people sold it, why do we need to know about the smelling spices if it didn't even last that long?
Okay, good question. Well, can I carry on? And then you'll see, it might have been the Ishmaelim all the time, okay? The first thing I want to say to tell you that we don't only have to listen to Rashi's opinion, even though he's the first and foremost commentator, is a comment that I read by a liberal rabbi. His name is Benno Jacob, who passed away in 1954, and he's quoted by Nechama Leibowitz, and he says, you know, you can say in English, you can say, they sold me down the river. Doesn't mean they sold me down the river. It's an expression to sort of, you sold me out. It means you disposed of me. But clearly his brothers were somehow indirectly responsible if they weren't directly responsible for Joseph's situation. And it's the way that the sentence is written is so strange, because we have, when we look at, let me look at the front page again. I don't need to bother turning, I'm just saying, they said that they sold him to Ishmaelite traders, but then we've suddenly got in 28, Midianites passed by. Well, where do they come into the story? And then the very last pasuk of this chapter, I'm just going to look for it. I don't know where it is at the moment. Let me just see. Yeah, it says here, Joseph. When Joseph gets to Egypt, which is where the story picks up again in chapter 39, I haven't got it on your sheet, I apologise for that. It says, when Joseph came down to Egypt and he got sold to Potiphar, and then we have the whole story of Potiphar and his wife, and it says, Miyad ha-Yishmaelim, by the hands of the Ishmaelites, Asher horiduhu shama, by the hands of the Ishmaelites who took him down to Egypt. So the Torah itself is telling us lots of things, and it's got some weird Midianites, and it's very, very, very ambiguous, and it's very difficult to understand. And then the last verse of the chapter that we're looking at, I don't have it on your sheet again, I'm sorry, but you can look it up, it's 36. It says, V'hamadonim mochru oso el Mitzrayim. Now we've got another group of people. We've got the Midyanim, we've got the Ishmaelim, we've got the brothers, and we've got the Medonim. Now, Medonim is not Midyanim. So what on earth are we to make of all this? And what are the choices? So the Midrash, Bereshis Rabbah, it's not on your sheet, 84:22. If anybody wants the rest of the sources, I can send them to you. They say that there were 4 sales. The brothers sold him to the Ishmaelim. The Ishmaelim sold them to the Socharim, because the Midyanim are called traders. And then we've got the Midyanim sold him to the Egyptians. And then there's another opinion that he didn't get sold straight to Potiphar, he got sold to Egyptian dignitaries. What is this? Where are we going with all of this? And I hope I've sufficiently confused you and I don't have a definitive answer. Sorry. Okay? Yeah.
I was just thinking that he was probably sold for a better price. I mean, he was probably a very tradable commodity.
Yes, apparently he was the most gorgeous young man. And
they
yeah.
made a profit out of him.
So just, I have to be honest, the answer is, who sold Joseph? I haven't got a clue. It's a lot of different opinions, okay? Let's look at the opinion of the Rashbam, because Rashi is very, very sure that it was the brothers. Okay? The Rashbam has got a completely different opinion to Rashi, and funnily enough, Rashbam is the grandson of Rashi, and he lived in Troyes, also in France, and he says the following. I didn't give it to you in Hebrew because it was quite long, and I'll just give it to you in English. So he says, Vaya'avru anoshim Midyanim, the Midianites passing by, is an unexpected and unanticipated event. While the brothers had been sitting down to eat their meal at source J, having distanced themselves somewhat from the pit which they had thrown Joseph in order to not be guilty of eating while spilling blood, they waited for the Ishmaelites who they saw in the distance. You have to imagine there's like 10 camels pulled along together. During this period, Midianites coming from a different direction had passed. They saw Joseph in the pit. Those Midianites pulled Joseph out the pit, and they, the Midianites, were the ones that sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. And the brothers had no idea what was going on. I'm just going to carry on reading where it says, one may assume that the brothers had no knowledge of this, because when Reuven comes back to look for his brother in the pit, and he tells his brothers, Joseph's not there, what am I going to do? They don't say, sorry, we sold him. So that's the Rashbam's proof that he didn't sell them. Even though the Torah appears to attribute the sale of Yosef to the Ishmaelites, the sale of Yosef to the Ishmaelites, to the brothers, that the brothers did it, based on the fact that Joseph himself said, you sold me down to Egypt, we would have to say that that was because they were instrumental in the sale. Whatever you say, their hands are not clean. They didn't look after their brother. They didn't. Because they had a part in the process, they are considered as have assisted in that sale. Whether or not they physically were the ones, they put him in the pit, the Midianites came, took him out, and the Ishmaelites sold him. It appears to me the deeper meaning of the plain text, it appears to me the deeper meaning of the plain text of the text both here and in chapter 45. The line describing the Midianites passing that way is described as something totally coincidental, having nothing to do with what the brothers had planned to do with Joseph. Even if the Torah says they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, it sounds like my grandfather Rashi says that the brothers did the selling, but it's also possible the Midianites just showed up, came out of nowhere, took Joseph, and that is the opinion of the Rashbam. And he backs it up further by saying, again, you don't have it on your sheet, he says, Midianites, Medanites, Ishmaelites, they're all tribes, they're all one thing, don't worry about it, nothing, according to the plain meaning of the text, they're the same people, they're sometimes called by one name, sometimes by the other name, and it doesn't matter, it's a generic name. I don't like the generic name because I think every name is significant. I'm bringing you the opinion of the Rashbam. And he backs up what he says, because in chapter 40, verse 15, Joseph says, Ki gonavti me'eretz ha'ivrim. I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews. And the Rashbam says the Midianites stole him and the brothers were not involved. Now, I can't give you a definitive answer, and there's loads of different opinions. Rabbis say loads of different things. The question is, what is going on and what can we learn from here? So now I just want to give you a minute, it's really running out of time. I just want you to have a look again at verses 20, 22 and 27. And I want you to tell me what was the plan of Joseph's brothers and how did the plan of Joseph's brothers evolve? 20, 22, 27.
Well, from killing him.
What's the first thing? So 20. 20. Come, let's kill him and chuck his body in a pit. That's 20. 22.
Don't kill him, just put him in a pit.
Okay, so can we see? Terrible, let's kill him right now. Then we see, no, let's just leave him in a pit and then we didn't actually kill him, you know? And number 27, and selling him to slavery. But then he's not dead. So there's a rabbi, his name is Rabbi David Foreman, and he lives in America, and he has a whole channel you can subscribe. It's called Aleph Beta. It's one of my favorite resources. I love learning from him. And he says, there is a plan, and as Madeline quite rightly said, obviously God is in charge of the plan. We had to get Joseph and Jacob down to Egypt somewhere, Yosef and Yaakov, and the whole of the Jewish people. But apart from human intervention, Judah, Yehuda, Reuven, and the brothers, what their ideas were, there's another thing at play here. And he says, the thing at play here is time. And we see that Joseph's brothers were angry with him. They didn't want him in their lives. They said to him, you are a dreamer. What do you think you're going to be ruling over us? And their initial impulsive gut reaction was, we hate you, let's kill him, let's get rid of him. A little bit of time passes and Reuven says, let's just put him in the pit. Let's just shelve it. Let's not be impulsive. Let's not do anything rash. Let's just wait. And then they sell him, which is not leave him in a pit to rot and die. They sell him. Maybe he has or he hasn't, depending on what you think, got a better chance of survival. And so I don't know who sold the Ishmaelites. I don't know who sold Joseph, whether it was the Ishmaelites, the Midianites. Difficult. We can see that it bothers the rabbis. They're looking carefully at the text. But I'd like to look at the overarching idea that there was stages in the process. And we have no idea. If it was the Midianites who sold him, maybe had they not come, the brothers would have thought to themselves, we're mad. What were we thinking? He's our brother. But they didn't have time on their side, because if they didn't sell him, the Midianites took him and it was too late. And in our own lives, I can talk about myself. Sometimes something happens and I do something that's impulsive and then I regret. And we've learned all these psychology things, tell you calm down, get down anger mountain, count to 5. If you're angry, don't send that email. Type it so you get your frustration out and wait till tomorrow. Because when we have time, we can hold ourselves back. We can be less impulsive. And then if the brothers had time and the Midianites didn't take Joseph and sell him down to Egypt, where he went to jail, the whole of the course of history could have been different if the brothers were only given more time. So in our own lives, if we have someone or something that gets on our nerves, or a difficult situation, breathe. And so if we don't know who sold the brothers We don't know who sold Joseph, we don't know who sold them. So the simple meaning of the text is it's the brothers. The Rashbam is very against that, and he says it's the Midianites, who just happen to be passing by. And sometimes we don't get a second chance. We don't get a second chance to hold ourselves back. If we take action quickly, we can regret. And so today I spoke about every word and every sentence and every letter is significant. The pit was empty, no water. The connection to Chanuka. Do we see if something's so far away? Do we take a superficial glance? Who sold Yosef? Oh, seeing what were the caravans carrying? Seeing the messages. Look, don't ignore things. Don't take superficial glances. Who sold Yosef? Does it matter? He got sold down. It's just awful how brothers could do that. The Rashbam says the brothers did not know. They didn't know. But either way, the brothers they're held by the Torah as indirectly responsible because of their actions. If they put him in a pit, they started this chain of events. We have to be very careful.
They never went to look for him afterwards, or when they went back and Jacob's distraught. They never had.
Okay, you have to invite me back next year if you want to hear all about that. That is so interesting because Joseph was 17 years old. No one ever came to look for him. He got sold. Why did his brothers never come to find him? How he felt. He must have felt like maybe my dad doesn't care. Maybe my brothers don't care. It's also about why did Joseph, when he was the viceroy in Egypt, never come back to his family and say, I'm alive? To be continued. I hope everybody has a wonderful Chanuka.